All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling a story that's practically the bedrock of Western civilization. The creation story, straight from the book of Genesis.
You mean the one that's shaped countless religions and ideas?
That's the one. We're going to unearth some fascinating stuff, even if you think you know this story like the back of your hand.
It is pretty amazing how this ancient text can still make people think and debate, even after all this time, thousands of years later.
No kidding. And we're not just skimming the surface here. We're going deep, like spelunking deep into the symbols, the structure, the big questions this book throws at us.
We'll be looking at why this story matters, not just for religious folks, but because it's had such a big impact on things like art and literature, even how we see the world today.
Exactly. So Genesis lays out creation in this really deliberate way, right? It's all in 6 days. Day 1, bam, light. Day 2, the waters get separated. Then comes land, plants, all those celestial bodies up there, sea creatures and birds, animals on the land. And finally, Todd, humans. What strikes me is how humans are created last. That's got to be significant, right?
Yeah, it's like the grand finale.
The big reveal.
You could definitely see it as like a hierarchy building up to the complexity of humans. But some scholars think it's more about what's needed, practically speaking. Like, you need light for anything else to even exist, so that comes first. Then you need the separation of waters to make a livable environment.
So each thing builds on the last.
Exactly. It's a sequence.
A carefully orchestrated sequence. I like that, like a cosmic recipe or something. But hold on, there's that repetition too. Each day has this pattern. God speaks, stuff gets created, God checks it out, says good, and then end of day.
Yeah. It's a rhythm.
What's that rhythm all about?
I think it shows the intentionality, you know? Each act of creation is deliberate.
Not just random chaos.
No, there's a plan, there's a purpose behind each element.
I'm seeing the pattern now, like a symphony. But hold on a sec. Day 4 kind of throws a wrench in things. The sun, moon, stars. They don't show up until after the plants.
Right.
But how are plants doing their photosynthesis thing without sunlight? It seems out of order.
Yes, the day 4 problem. It's caused centuries of debate. Some scholars, they say, hold on, these days aren't literal 24-hour days. They say they're like vast epochs of time. And with that interpretation, the plant sunlight problem kind of disappears. Plant life could have evolved under some other light source before the sun as we know it came about.
Oh, interesting. So those days could be symbolic, representing huge chunks of time. But are there other ways to understand this? I mean, people back then weren't dummies. They knew plants needed sun.
Of course. Another idea is that day 1 is all about the creation of light itself. The source doesn't matter at that point. Light just is. So plants can do their thing. Then day 4 rolls around and the sun, moon, stars, they show up as timekeepers.
Like to put this new world on a schedule?
Yeah, adding structure, rhythm to the universe.
So it's like a 2-step process. Raw light energy first, and then these big, fancy celestial bodies to rule day and night.
Precisely. And you know what's fascinating? The author might have put the sun and moon after plants on purpose to show how important they were to those ancient cultures. Back then, the sun and moon weren't just objects in the sky. They were often seen as gods, you know? They were central to religion and understanding the whole cosmos. So placing them later in the story could be a way to really emphasize how powerful and important they were.
Wow, that's a thought-provoking take. Shows how much depth there is in this story. But let's move on to humans. The language gets really interesting there. It's not just, poof, humans exist. It's, let us make humankind in our image. Plural pronouns. Who is this mysterious us?
That's one of the most debated verses in all of Genesis. Some people see it as a hint at the Trinity.
The Christian idea. God as Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Yeah, exactly. Like a subtle foreshadowing.
That's interesting. But are there other ways to understand this us?
Yeah.
Not everyone reading Genesis would have known about the Trinity.
Right. Good point. Other scholars say it's what's called a majestic plural.
A what? No.
A majestic plural. It emphasizes God's grandeur and power. Like when a king uses we to refer to himself.
Oh, I get it. It's like God saying, I am creation. The whole Shalem.
Exactly, a royal declaration. But then you have, in our image, what does it even mean to be made in God's image? Are we talking about physically looking like God?
Or is it something deeper?
That's the million-dollar question. Does it refer to our physical appearance? Or is it about sharing God's qualities? Our capacity for reason, creativity, love, compassion?
Or maybe both.
Maybe.
Whoa, that's a lot to unpack. Do we look like God, think like God, or even feel like God? This is where things get pretty philosophical.
Absolutely. And that's part of what makes the Genesis creation story so fascinating. It's not just a straightforward account. It's an invitation to wrestle with these big questions about our origins, our nature, our relationship with the divine.
Listener, are you feeling your brain getting a good stretch? Because we're just getting started. There's so much more to uncover in this ancient text. Buckle up.
It's wild how the creation story goes from like this huge cosmic scale to a really personal human level.
Yeah, it's like zooming in from outer space right into this little paradise.
We go from the whole universe to this lush garden, the Garden of Eden.
Where humanity's story really kicks off. Trees, rivers, animals that talk. Sounds like a dream vacation spot.
It does.
But then there's that one rule. Don't touch the forbidden fruit.
Right.
It's like the original keep your hands to yourself warning.
Yeah.
We all know how that usually goes.
Well, the Garden of Eden, it's often seen as this place of innocence and harmony.
Right.
But it's also where free will comes in.
Yeah.
And the possibility of, disobedience.
Right. That food is a pretty big deal. But why was eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil such a big no-no?
Some interpretations, they focus on knowledge itself being dangerous, like humans just weren't ready for the burden of understanding good and evil.
Ignorance is bliss.
Something like that. But it's more complicated than that, I think.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Too much knowledge without the wisdom to handle it could be a recipe for disaster. It's like suddenly having all the information in the world at your fingertips, but not being mature enough to deal with it.
Exactly. But there's another perspective. Some people think the forbidden fruit represents choice.
A choice.
Yeah, a choice to disobey God, to assert independence. It's about pushing boundaries and seeing what happens when you exercise free will.
So it's not really about the apple itself. It's what it represents, like a rebellion against authority.
Precisely. Cosmic teenage angst.
And that rebellion, that choice, it has some serious consequences.
It does. Adam and Eve get kicked out of the garden.
Paradise lost.
Pain, suffering, toil. It all enters the human experience.
I've always wondered about this. Why even create a tree that's going to tempt humans in the first place? Isn't that kind of setting them up to fail? Seems a bit unfair.
That's where free will comes in, I think. If God wanted mindless robots who just follow orders, why bother creating humans who can make their own choices? The tree being there suggests God values free will, even if it means humans might choose to disobey, even if it leads to suffering.
So it's a risk.
Yeah.
But it allows for real love and a genuine relationship.
Right. You can't force someone to love you.
It has to be a choice.
Exactly. And this whole tension between obedience and free will, between good and evil, it runs throughout the Bible and throughout human history.
It's the ultimate philosophical debate right there in the creation story. It really makes you think about the choices we make every day.
Yeah. The constant back and forth between our good impulses and, those darker desires.
Yeah.
It's important to remember, though, that even after they mess up, after they get kicked out of Eden, Adam and Eve are still made in God's image.
That's right.
That inherent worth, that little spark of the divine, it's still there.
So even when we make mistakes, we're not totally lost.
Right. There's still hope for redemption.
There's still hope. But before we go down that road, let's talk about that serpent. Talk about a bad influence. Who is this slippery character, and what's his deal?
The serpent. He's one of the most fascinating and debated characters in Genesis, often seen as a symbol of temptation.
Of evil.
Evil, yeah. Even as a representation of Satan.
Whoa. The OG snake in the grass.
Whispering doubts, leading people astray.
But is the serpent actually called Satan in the text? I always thought that was like a later interpretation.
You're right. The text doesn't explicitly say that. It just describes him as being more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made.
Subtle. That's a good word. It's not brute force, is it? It's all about manipulation.
Yeah.
Planting seeds of doubt.
Exactly. The serpent's power is in his ability to deceive, to twist things around.
To appeal to our curiosity, right? And our desire for something more.
Yeah. He doesn't force Eve to eat the fruit. He manipulates her with his words.
Plays on her desire for knowledge.
Yeah.
It's like psychological warfare. Makes you wonder, why is temptation so strong? Why are we so easily swayed by those whispers of doubt?
That's a question philosophers and theologians have been debating for ages. It gets at something deep inside us.
This vulnerability to temptation.
Yeah. That longing for something more than what we have. The classic struggle between what we know is right and what we secretly want.
It's that little voice saying, Go on, you know you want to.
Exactly.
But the serpent being there, it's more than just causing trouble.
Mm-hmm.
It's a warning, isn't it? A reminder to watch out for those who might lead us down the wrong path.
Precisely. He's a cautionary tale about the dangers of temptation and what can happen if we give in.
We've all had those moments, haven't we? Those forbidden fruit moments.
Right.
Where we're tempted to take the easy route.
Right. To compromise what we believe in, to give in to those darker impulses.
Oh, yeah. I've fallen for my fair share of those. But it's not about beating ourselves up over it.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing those moments.
Yeah.
And making a different choice next time.
That's it.
The Genesis story isn't just about the beginning of the world. It's about the beginning of human consciousness, our ability to choose between good and evil, and that constant struggle to pick the right path.
The path that leads to flourishing.
It's amazing how much depth there is in a story that most people think of as a simple creation myth.
It makes you realize those ancient texts can still speak to us today.
Yeah.
They offer insights into our own lives and the choices we make.
Absolutely. Listener, I hope you're taking notes. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's more to come.
Oh, yeah.
In our final segment, we're shifting gears a bit. We're going to look at how the Genesis creation story has influenced things like art, literature, even modern science. You won't want to miss it. Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into Genesis.
The creation story, that is.
Yeah. We've explored how creation happened, the Garden of Eden, all that. Free will, that sneaky serpent. Now we're stepping outside the text itself.
We're going to see how those ancient ideas have stuck around.
How they've shaped things like art, literature, even science.
It really is amazing how this story, written so long ago, still has an impact on us today.
Thousands of years.
It's like it's part of our cultural DNA or something, shaping how we see ourselves, the world, the whole cosmos.
Okay, so let's start with art. I mean, the creation story is practically screaming to be painted or sculpted or made into a movie.
Oh, totally. All that imagery, light and darkness, the sky, the sea, all those plants and animals.
It's so visual, right?
Absolutely. And artists have been inspired by it for centuries.
Michelangelo,
those famous frescoes in the Sistine Chapel.
Right.
William Blake's watercolors, so mystical.
It's like they're trying to capture creation itself, all that awe and wonder, the mystery.
And they're not just showing the scenes literally, you know.
Oh.
They're exploring bigger ideas about theology and philosophy through those images, the origin of everything, our purpose, how humanity relates to God, the consequences of the choices we make.
It's like the creation story gives them this universal language to talk about these timeless questions.
Exactly. And it's not just visual art either.
What about literature?
Literature owes a lot to Genesis. Think of Paradise Lost. John Milton reimagining Adam and Eve's fall.
Right, exploring all that temptation stuff, free will, good versus evil.
Exactly. Or Frankenstein by Mary Shelley.
That's a classic.
She takes that whole creation theme and kind of flips it around, asks questions about what it means to play God, what happens when science goes too far.
It's a cautionary tale.
Very much so. And still relevant today with all the stuff about genetic engineering and AI.
Wow. So this ancient story is still speaking to us, even with modern problems.
Absolutely. These foundational myths, they help us make sense of the world, even as it keeps changing.
What about science, then? Has Genesis had an impact there?
You bet. The Big Bang Theory, the idea of the universe starting from a single point. People have compared that to the let there be light moment in Genesis.
Yeah, I can see that. It's almost like science is figuring out the how of creation. And Genesis is about the why.
The meaning, the purpose.
Right, exactly. And with all the discoveries in genetics and evolution, it challenges some of the literal interpretations of Genesis, for sure. But it also raises new questions about where life came from, how everything is connected, humanity's role in it all.
It does.
So even as science keeps advancing, the Genesis story is still relevant. It makes us think about the big questions, the mysteries that science might never fully explain.
That's what's so cool about these ancient texts. They offer a different way of understanding.
Different perspectives.
They get us thinking about the big picture, pondering the mysteries of existence.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Genesis.
The creation story.
Yes, a creation story.
Yeah.
We want to leave you with this thought. It's not just some dusty old story.
No way.
It's still shaping how we understand ourselves, our world, our place in the whole universe.
It's a story about where everything began, good and evil, and what it really means to be human.
It's been amazing exploring all this with you. You've been a fantastic guide.
I've really enjoyed it.
And to our listener, thank you so much for joining us. Keep exploring, keep thinking, and keep asking those big questions. There's a whole world of insight waiting to be discovered in the Genesis creation story. Until next time, keep seeking, keep learning,